I've got a strange message tonight. It's really weird, okay? It's called the swamp. The swamp syndrome. And I'll explain it to you as I go along. But first, a lady just recently said to me, "You're not a preacher, you're a storyteller." So I have to tell you a story. Some of you know I was saved in April 1977. A year later, I was in a car accident, and a lady was killed in the other car. And it started a series of court cases where I was arrested and charged with 5 counts of, I can't remember all the details now, but such a long time ago, but they were going to throw the book at me. It happened in New South Wales as I was on my way to build a church in Albury. Incidentally, that church was finally built and is now 800 strong, so it was a God thing from the word go. But it started 14 months and 28 days of desperately yearning and seeking God for my life. My wife was quite young, and I had 2 young children. I had 2 businesses. I had a farm to run, and here I was going to be locked up. That's what the detectives said. They said, "There's no doubt you're going away." So I don't know whether you have mortgages or not, but when you are self-employed and you have a mortgage and you're always running out of cash, because you wouldn't know what that's like, it's difficult to try and come to grips with the fact of what's going to happen to your wife and your kids and your properties and so on. This was my swamp time. This was my time of agonizing over, just 12 months old in the Lord, desperately in love with Jesus, hungered for him, spent hours in the Word, and in prayer, fasting, and so on and so forth. And in that time, God sent a lady to us that we didn't know this lady at all. And she had a message for us from the Lord. And the scripture she had was Daniel chapter 6, verse 22, that said, "O God, I've been found innocent in your sight, for I am not guilty." You know, when Daniel was in the lion's den and the king comes to him, which was a great boost to our faith. And then started the hearing, and I was sent to a criminal court, to appear in a criminal court, and then there was a coroner's court, and then 4 times I had to drive an 8-hour trip from my home to Albury in New South Wales to appear in court. The first time I was to appear, the policeman stood up and said he hadn't got his forensic together, so therefore they asked for the case to be adjourned. So it was put back a month. So I had to drive home and drive back a month later, and the next time I appeared in court, it was, there'd been an axe murder up in New South Wales, and so all other cases were adjourned, and I had to go home. And the third time I arrived in court, there was some other problem, so they sent me home again. So the last time I appeared, on the 28th day, 14 months and 28 days from the accident, I went through the court case. In that 14 months and 28 days, it was like I was wading through a swamp. I don't know if you can fully understand this, but if you've walked into the sea and in clear water, and you get up to about here in water, it's hard to walk, isn't it? You're pushing against a great mound of water. When I spent 3 years in the army, they used to train us on the edge of a billabong that was landlocked, and it was like a swamp. And so they'd march us into this, or run us into it, with our rifle above our head, all our bandoliers of bullets, and 60 pound of pack, fully dressed, into this swamp. And up to about here, well, it was up to about here on me and up to about here on most of the guys. But to wade through the mud and the roots and the leeches and snakes and billions of mosquitoes, it was just like hell. And you'd fall down and you'd get absolutely wet and mud all over you, and then you'd have mud in your boots, and then they'd bring you out the other side, and then they'd take you for a 10-mile, not kilometre, 10-mile march, double time. You march for 20 minutes, you rest for 5, march 20, rest for 5. Now you'd be chafed everywhere over your body, and the straps would be, you'd just come out with just hardly any skin left on your shoulders and stuff like that. It was a swamp. And many of my Christian experiences have been like that swamp. Not so much the enemy attacking me, but the leeches. Jesus said, a man's worst enemies are the members of his own household. And I don't know how many times my closest friends have said, why don't you give up? Why do you struggle? Why do you want to be a Christian when you're going through all this stuff? I didn't like the swamp, but what the swamp did was it brought me into a maturity that I could not have achieved if I hadn't gone through all those steps, different steps. And there's a scripture in the Bible that it's a little hard to come to grips with, I suppose, but it's in Luke 22, 31 to 32. And I'm reading this out of the Amplified Bible, but it's where Jesus is talking to Simon, and he says, Simon, Simon, listen. Satan has asked excessive permission that all of you be given to him out of the power and keeping of God, that he might sift all of you like grain. But I have prayed, Jesus said, especially for you, Peter, that your own faith may not fail. And when you yourself have turned again, strengthen and establish your brothers. In other words, Jesus doesn't really say there, we've given him permission, but in essence, that's how it reads. That Satan says, that Jesus says, we've given him permission, we want him to sift you. I think in the original King James, he says, he's asked permission to sift you like wheat, where it's a thrashing time. Jesus never promised that we would have a life of champagne and caviar. In essence, the gospel tells us we're going to have a life of beer and Skittles. That we're going to come under different types of pressures. And the pressures that we come under, although they're difficult to go through, it's like the swamp. At times you're knee-deep in mud, trying to drag your feet out of the mud. But the scripture then comes to you He took my feet out of the miry clay and put my feet on a rock to stay. It's in those moments and those swamp experiences that you understand the enormous privilege of being a son of God, of being able to throw yourself on him, and that he speak to someone you don't know who comes to you and gives you the encouragement from Daniel that drives you on and says, well, I'm going to come out of this, I'm going to come through it. And then the miracles start happening. The strangest things happen. The policeman in the court said, I should handcuff you to myself because that's what I'm supposed to do. And they took my tie and my handkerchief and the laces out of my shoes and my belt so that I didn't do myself harm. And he's sitting next to me in court's in session, and he leans over to me and says, I don't know what it is about you, but there's something different about you. He said, my wife died of cancer. My eldest son is a heroin addict, and my youngest son, I only have 2 boys, and he's an alcoholic. Can you help me? You see, even in the swamp, the Lord speaks to you and gives you the encouragement to do away with your own issues and reach out to someone else who has a greater need than you do at that precise moment. Suffice to say, we led that policeman to the Lord. I think through that experience, that initial experience, what it did for me was it proved me and honed me in such a way that it brought my life into a mature place where that not only could I hear God, not only could I clearly hear his voice, but that with all my heart I wanted to do nothing but his will. That money, property, life, all those things were of no consequence to me anymore. I'd found the pearl of great price, and that was in the swamp. I didn't find it on the mountaintop. I didn't find it in the valley. I found it in the adversity that came into my life through not being diligent in my driving. Needless to say, I was found not guilty, and I was completely exonerated and released. Whilst the laws of the land did that, in here was an ache that I had taken a human life. Now, it was totally, neither of the vehicles had any hope of seeing each other in that situation that we were in. Did I leave my home to build a church for the people of Albury with an intent to do harm to someone? No, I didn't. But on the way, it happened. Now, won't go into all more details, but I was in hospital. I was bleeding from internally and from all my ears and eyes and nose and so on. But God spoke to me in the car, crushed all my right side, crushed in. God spoke. And I have the words here, and he said, I've allowed you to touch him once, Satan. You'll never touch him again. So as I went through the swamp, I kept repeating those words. That's what you said, Lord. That's what you said, Lord. And I realized that the swamp was only so far, and then I could see the green grass and the trees and the island that was waiting for me to come out the other side. And then people that I didn't know started sending me scriptures. The angel of the Lord, Psalm 32, I think it is, encampeth around those who fear him. and he will deliver them. And scripture after scripture like that came to my home. But in it all, there was a joy in going through the adversity because of what was coming ahead. And I want to say to you, I want to provoke you that if you're going through a swamp situation and the leeches are sucking your blood and you're knee-deep in mud and you're pushing against water and carrying a heavy load, I want to encourage you that in that time, God is honing you for something greater. He's bringing a greatness out of you that he can only bring through those times. You okay?
Yes.
At that time, he gave me another scripture. Well, he gave me many scriptures, but it was Hebrews chapter 13, verses 5 and 6. And it was, let your character or moral disposition be free from the love of money, including greed, avarice, lust, and craving of earthly possessions. And be satisfied with your present circumstances and with what you have. For he, God himself, has said, I will not in any way fail you, nor give you up, nor leave you without support. I will not in any degree leave you helpless nor forsake you, nor let you down, nor relax my hold on you, assuredly not. So we can take comfort and are encouraged and confidently and boldly say, the Lord is my helper. I will not be seized with alarm. I will not fear or dread or be terrified, for what can man do to me? That scripture was given to me halfway through those court cases. And it strengthened me no end to know that I had a creator God that was greater than the law courts of the land, greater than anything man could do to me, that he himself would guide me and lead me through the swamp. And when I stumbled and fell over a tree root or a dead tree or whatever, or the mosquitoes were impossible to deal with, that he promised he'd never let me go, he'd never let go of me. So, about 3-4 weeks ago, I started to walk through another swamp. The dreaded Jimmy the Dancer. You wouldn't know what that means because you're not Australians, most of you. But really what it means is the cancer. My doctor looked at the top of my head and he said to me, I don't like the look of that. I think it's a problem. I'm going to take a biopsy. Took a biopsy, rang me the next day, said, come in. It's an aggressive malignant melanoma. We have to get it off. So the closest time I could get into the plastic surgeon for him to mutilate my arm and dig a piece out of here to find if I had a brain left and then cover it up when he found out I did have something in there. In between that period of time, a very good friend of mine, Pastor Fiuwe, who you have met in Papua New Guinea, rang me and he said, look, in our prayer meeting this morning, your name came up and we were really concerned about you, and we started to travail before God and storm heaven for you. Is there something wrong? So I told him about the cancer and that it had to be removed. And he said, well, I'm going to get our 680 churches to pray for you and for them to fast in order that God will deal with this thing. Now, it was as big as a 50-cent piece, and when the surgeon finally cut it out, it was as big as a 10-cent piece, so it had reduced massively in size. When I went yesterday and he took the original dressings off, he said, I've got good news from the pathology. All the cells in the skin are perfect. There's no cancer. One pathological or whatever it is, demonological statement said it's cancer. It's aggressive. It's got to go. The other one said, no, it's not cancer.